The Old York Prison is perhaps America's most eerie, abandoned 19th century correctional center, complete with endless folklore, adding mystery to its already very frightening appearance. Although little is documented about what transpired within these walls, we do know that bedbug infestations were rampant, and capital punishment was carried out at ease. It has even been speculated that prisoners here were served roadkill for dinner. But where does the truth lie, and what is the fate of this disheveled old building? Join me to find out, as today we discover the history of the Old York Prison. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. The first York County Jail was built in the year 1755. The building was exceedingly small and contained 2 large rooms to hold prisoners. There were no individual cells, and the facility was a mess. The building had many barred windows to keep the inmates from escaping, and as the population grew, an addition was added in the early 1800s. But by 1854, the building had deteriorated so much that it was torn down altogether. A year earlier, the York Prison had finished construction, and originally, it was just one element that formed a wider complex of county custodial facilities, including the York County Poorhouse and Hospital. The County Poorhouse, or County Infirmary, was a type of welfare institution that existed in many counties in the United States during the 19th and early 20th centuries. These institutions were established to provide care and assistance to individuals who were destitute, homeless, or unable to support themselves due to poverty, illness, disability, or other reasons. The concept of the county poorhouse was rooted in the idea of public welfare and charity. This concept was brought to America as inspired by the English Poor Laws, which date back to the 16th century and were instrumental in shaping the concept of workhouses and poor relief in Europe. The Poor Laws established a system of caring for the poor and destitute, which included workhouses for those who were capable of work but unable to support themselves. The workhouse system aimed to deter idleness and offered minimal support while requiring inmates to work in exchange for their care. The phrase "going to the poorhouse" or "send you to the poorhouse" originated from this historical practice. It conveyed the idea that someone was facing financial ruin or destitution and would need to rely on public assistance for their basic needs. Anyhow, when certain lines were crossed in York County, punishment became a factor, hence the need for more severe incarceration. The York Prison was opened in 1853 and featured an imposing, almost castle-like design, very unfamiliar to its current look. This was typical for prisons of the time in Pennsylvania, as government architecture was frequently planned for utility, but also to communicate a message to the public. In the case of these old prisons, I think the message is clear. When inmates were booked, they'd be assigned a cell block near the rear within the housing unit. For recreation, there was an undersized courtyard, a reportedly very unsanitary cafeteria, and limited access to restrooms and showers. The chosen location was perfect for detention, as the combination of a nearby river and railroad embankment formed natural barriers, while the otherwise flat plot that the building itself occupied offered great sightlines for guards. Additionally, it was far enough away from the historic Old Town that the good-standing citizens wouldn't be bothered by the view of a prison, as the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. In 1892, a convict known as Baltimore Joe got 3 months behind bars and was so disturbed by his experience that he wrote to a local newspaper complaining, exclaiming that the inmates survived off a morning ration of bootlegged coffee, meaning the quality was adulterated with other questionable substances, and a common loaf of bread followed by another ration of bread in the evening. However, on Wednesdays, the prisoners got a pan of what he called shadow soup, a type of bean broth that Joe felt was a treat compared to just bread. By 1906, York's first major prison was too small for the still-growing population, so it was replaced by the colossal building that we see today. Going back to the notion of messages within architecture, this 5-story, red brick structure measuring 30,000 square feet made a statement of its own: brutality. The substantial rectangular structure is adorned with rows of vertical windows, set back and filled with sturdy bars. An arched main entrance adds to its architectural appeal, along with a decorative cornice positioned just below the roofline. Getting locked up here was a very scary experience. Just stepping out of line could result in solitary confinement, a padded room said to make men lose their minds. Segregation was another issue that created undue pressure amongst various groups within the facility, and we'll elaborate on that later, but for worst-case scenarios, prisoners feared the so-called hanging hook, with a trap door that was used for capital punishment. By 1950, complaints about the food arose again, with very disturbing claims of prisoners being fed roadkill. And now, considering the controversial nature of this claim, I looked into it in depth, and the only public mention I ever found proposing that inmates eat roadkill came about way later in the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1996, when the commissioner of Clarion County proposed that deer found along the road often has a lot of good meat on it, and that local deer meat could be an improvement to the highly processed meals prisoners ate. At great controversy, others also observed that since prisoners frequently cleaned the roadside, there might be a very efficient synergy at hand. That being said, in reality, this was highly unlikely, as even in the 1950s, intentionally feeding inmates any contaminated food would have been highly illegal, even back then. What's more likely, however, is that the prisoners compared the food to that of roadkill, which makes a lot of sense, as according to the Daily Record, prisoners were absolutely served a dish named food loaf. Food loaf is a kind of food dumped into a blender with flour or cornmeal that you bake later. However, given the extremely low quality of prison food, in light of the fact that it's highly processed for an extremely long shelf life, and the random combination of ingredients you might encounter in food loaf, the roadkill might have actually been a better bet. The article's author tasted some food loaf while he did the story, recalling the food had, quote, curious lumps in it, which he didn't want to think about. A problem pointed out in the publication, never to be forgotten, which recalls that the prison symbolized a lot that was not right about York up until the 1950s. Underlining the jail's practice of segregating black and white prisoners in different cell blocks at night, black and white males also received visitors on separate days, although visitors could see minority and white women on the same day. Should be pointed out here that this practice was not isolated to just this one facility. It was commonplace in the United States back then. The publication also asserts that when only one woman was incarcerated, she was housed in a padded cell, perhaps to keep from opening larger quarters for a single inmate. Furthermore, 2 former inmates claimed that the only meat they were ever served in a 2-week stint was venison from a carcass state police had removed from a county road. Once again, bringing up this uncomfortable, dark accusation about the prison. The inmates also claimed that the jail was full of bedbugs, and jail officers did not demand newcomers to take a bath or shower. In other words, it was filthy. And now, perhaps bringing a bit of validity to these claims, a York County osteopath had spent the night in jail rather than paying a parking ticket, and he made the same claims. The part of the complex known as the poorhouse was removed and replaced with Alexander Good's School. Then, the Old York County Prison shut its doors in 1979, and inmates were relocated to the newly established correctional facility on Concord Road. The new facility has a maximum of 2,400 beds and 276 beds for the Work Release Center. Unlike the previous establishment, however, the new center takes a far more modern approach to justice, with the mission reading, "The mission of the York County Prison is to maintain a safe, secure environment for a diverse population of incarcerated individuals, staff, and visitors. We are dedicated to implementing innovative security methods and working with our community partners to provide quality education and evidence-based treatment programs to increase the probability of successful community reentry." However, the topic of the old prison didn't just go away. In fact, it's been a major skeleton in the closet for the community for decades now. In the years that followed the Old York prison closing, the abandoned structure would find itself at the center of a dramatic series of events. The initial discussions surrounding the prison's fate ranged between the unusual prospect of transforming it into a restaurant and the more utilitarian option of clearing it to make way for a parking lot. Among numerous other ideas, however, the narrative took a turn when the prison ownership changed hands. Ultimately, in 2014, the Redevelopment Authority of the City of York exercised eminent domain and claimed both the 2.9-acre property and the abandoned prison. This legal maneuver marked a pivotal moment in the prison's history. As it stands today, the future of the Old York County Prison remains uncertain, existing in a state of limbo. Which I suppose brings us full circle, so we'll leave it there for today. But thank you all for watching and subscribing. And until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.